Right now, wherever you're sitting, there's a very good chance you are within 2 miles of one, and you have never once thought about it. It's that ugly steel lattice thing on the ridge by the highway, or the skinny white pole behind the Wendy's that somebody tried to disguise as a pine tree and did a genuinely terrible job of it. You've driven past these things 10,000 times. You've cursed at one, indirectly, when your phone dropped a call in the middle of an argument you were winning. And I'd bet real money you have never wondered who owns it. I did wonder. About 8 years ago, I was sitting in a pickup truck outside Salina, Kansas, with a wheat farmer named Ray Whitfield, and Ray pointed at the tower standing in the far corner of his field and told me that thing paid him more per year than his best 40 acres. Same dirt. Except the tower doesn't need rain, doesn't care about commodity prices, and has never once been eaten by a grasshopper. I asked him the obvious question. Ray, if it's that good, why don't you build another one? And he laughed at me. Not a mean laugh. The laugh a guy gives you when you've just revealed you don't understand the business at all. He was right. I didn't. So let me tell you what I've learned since, because the economics of a cell tower are some of the strangest numbers in American infrastructure, and almost nobody talks about them. Here's the thesis. I'm going to say it up front, so you can decide right now whether I'm crazy. A cell tower is not a technology business. It is not really a telecom business either. A cell tower is an apartment building that somebody stood up on its end. And like every apartment building on Earth, the fortune is not in the first tenant. The fortune is in the second and the third. Everything else here is a footnote to that sentence. So let's build one. On paper. Right now. You want a macro tower. Industry term for the big ones. The 200-foot lattice or monopole structures that do the heavy lifting of a network. In the United States, a standard build runs around $275,000 all in. Steel, foundation, access road, fencing, concrete pad, electrical service, the surveyor, and the zoning lawyer you're absolutely going to need. 275 grand. Fine. Now you sign Verizon. Congratulations. You have just entered one of the worst businesses in America. Because a tower with a single tenant generates a gross margin of about 40% and a return on investment of roughly 3%. 3%. On $250,000 of steel you just sank into the ground for 25 years. You could have bought a treasury bill from your phone and done better, with no lawyer, no zoning board, and no rattlesnakes. So why does anyone do this? Here's where it gets good. That same tower was engineered from day one to hold 4 or 5 tenants, and the second one changes everything. Tenant 2 goes on, and your return jumps to around 13%. Tenant 3, mid-20s, same steel, same access road, same guy driving out twice a year to check the bolts and cut the weeds. You didn't spend another $275,000. You spent maybe 30 grand on reinforcement and some coax runs. Everything else is margin. That's the entire industry right there. The first tenant pays for the building. The second pays for your kids. The third pays for the boat. My first real boss on the telecom desk, a guy named Marcus Deal who chain-drank Diet Coke and had the emotional range of a filing cabinet, drew this for me on a napkin in 2013. 3 little boxes stacked on a line, and next to them, 3, 13, 24. Then he said, and I quote, "Everything else on this desk is noise." I thought he was oversimplifying. He was not. He retired at 46. Now here's the part that makes it almost unfair. Who are those 3 tenants? Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. 3 companies that spend billions a year attacking each other in Super Bowl ads whose entire marketing budget exists to convince you the other 2 are garbage. And they're all paying rent to the same landlord, to hang their equipment on the same pole 40 feet apart. That is the joke at the center of this business. The tower company is neutral. It sells shelf space to enemies. And the more they hate each other, the more they both need to be on every hill in the country, and the better the tower business does. Okay, twist number 1. You do not own the ground. This took me the longest to understand, and it's the most misunderstood fact in the whole sector. In the vast majority of cases, the company that owns the tower does not own the land underneath it. They lease it. from a guy like Ray. So the real structure is a three-layer sandwich. On the bottom, a landowner, a farmer, a church, a self-storage operator, a school district, a guy with a flat warehouse roof. In the middle, the tower company, paying that landowner ground rent. On top, the carriers, paying the tower company a much bigger number. The tower company is a middleman landlord. It rents dirt cheap and sublets it expensive. That's the trick. What's the dirt cost? Nationally, ground leases average around $1,300 a month, and most new proposals being signed right now land between $500 and $1,250. Rural sites at the low end. Urban rooftops in New York or San Francisco run several thousand and up. Now hold that number. $500 to $1,300 a month going out to the landowner. Multiple carriers paying rent coming in on top. You see the spread. Ray was getting $1,100 a month. He thought he'd won the lottery. And in a way he had, because he did nothing. But he also had no idea there were 3 tenants on that tower. Which brings me to Big Ron. Ron owns a truck stop off I-70 in eastern Ohio. Diesel, showers, a subway, and a tower in the back lot. Ron is one of maybe 4 landowners I've ever met who read his lease before signing it. Ron negotiated a co-location revenue share, meaning every time the tower company adds a new tenant to that structure, Ron gets a percentage, not a bump, a percentage of the new rent. Ron makes about 4 times what his neighbor 12 miles down the road makes off a nearly identical site on the same highway with the same carriers. Not because his dirt is better. Because he read 40 pages of paper and asked one question the site acquisition guy really did not want him to ask. That clause is rare. Most landowners never get it, because most landowners never ask. Okay, second thing that makes this business special, and it's the quietest one: escalators. A standard American tower lease has a rent escalator baked in, typically around 3% a year, every year, automatic, written into the contract. No negotiation, no renewal fight, no phone call. 3% doesn't sound like anything. Compounded over 25 years, it turns a $1,000 rent check into roughly $2,100. And here's the part that matters. The tower company's costs on that site are basically flat. Taxes, maintenance, insurance. So every year, the spread gets wider, forever, without anybody doing anything. That's not a lease. That's an annuity with a growth rate stapled to it. This is exactly why the sector gets called a bond proxy, which is a compliment right up until it isn't. My friend Jeff Kaminsky runs money for a family office in Chicago. Around 2019, he described his American tower position to me as, his words, a bond that grows, long contracts, investment-grade tenants, escalators, near total renewal rates. He talked about it the way some guys talk about a golden retriever. Then 2022 happened. Rates went vertical, and every asset on earth that people valued like a bond got repriced like a bond. Jeff's golden retriever got taken behind the barn, down roughly 40% peak to trough on a business whose actual cash flows never blinked. I bring that up because it's the most important thing to understand if you're looking at this sector as an investor. The operations and the stock price are 2 different animals. The rent kept showing up, the multiple did not. All right, let's talk about the buyout letter. Because if you own land with a tower on it, one of these is coming, and it might be the most consequential piece of mail you ever get. My father-in-law Tom got his about 3 years ago. Tower on a hill behind his house in western Pennsylvania. $1,100 a month. A company he'd never heard of sent him a letter offering a lump sum for the rights to his future rent. 6 figures, sitting right there in the envelope. He called me on a Sunday, and I could hear it in his voice. He was already halfway spent. So here's the math you need in that moment. These buyouts are quoted as a multiple of annual rent. Quality sites have traded roughly in the 15 to 30 times range. And a lot of consultants will tell you anything under 15 is a lowball. Unsolicited offers, the ones that show up cold in your mailbox, commonly come in 20 to 30% below what the site is worth. And think about who's on the other side. A company whose entire business is buying these streams, working off a database of 300,000 cell sites. They know the traffic through that tower, whether the carrier has an alternative site nearby, and whether your lease renews in 3 years at a much higher rate. You know none of that. When someone with perfect information offers you a lump sum for an asset with an automatic escalator and a 50-year runway, the correct first reaction isn't excitement, it's suspicion. Tom didn't sell. Not because I'm smart, because he's stubborn, which in finance is occasionally the same thing. Now zoom out, because the numbers at the top of this industry are genuinely absurd. American Tower is one of the largest REITs on the planet. Roughly 150,000 communication sites globally, around $10.5 billion of annual revenue, adjusted EBITDA margin near 64%. 64% on steel, on things that just stand there. SBA Communications had over 46,000 towers at the end of last year. Crown Castle did about $6.5 billion in revenue and has been reshaping itself into a pure-play American tower company, selling off its fiber and small cell businesses in a deal worth $8.5 billion. These are some of the largest landlords in the United States, and their tenants are 3 phone companies, which is exactly the problem. Here's a number that should make you sit up. For SBA last year, T-Mobile was about 31% of total revenue, AT&T Wireless about 20%, Verizon about 15%. Add it up. 2/3 of the company's revenue from 3 customers. If you brought me a private business with 66% concentration in 3 accounts, I wouldn't finance it. In this sector, we call it a moat, and sometimes the concentration bites. When T-Mobile bought Sprint in 2020, 4 national carriers became 3. Every tower where both had equipment suddenly had a redundant tenant. That's called churn, and it's still working through the system. For SBA alone, that merger has meant something on the order of $75 million of lost revenue spread over several years. Remember tenant 3 paying for the boat? Now imagine tenant 3 cancels. And then there's the Dish story, which is the closest thing this industry has to a tragedy. For years, everyone in towers was waiting on a 4th national carrier. Dish, later EchoStar, had spectrum and a federal mandate to build a network. Tower companies signed enormous long-term contracts with them and underwrote a 4th tenant on tens of thousands of sites. That was the growth story. It did not happen. EchoStar sold its spectrum instead, roughly $40 billion worth, to AT&T and SpaceX, and walked away. Tower companies say they were left holding more than $9 billion of contracted obligations that went unpaid. Crown Castle and American Tower both sued. The FCC required $2.4 billion be set aside in escrow while the litigation plays out. The 4th tenant everybody built for is not coming. Biggest structural change in this business in a decade, and it happened quietly, in the business section. The balance sheets aren't for the faint of heart either. SBA closed last year, carrying roughly $13 billion in debt against a shareholders' deficit of nearly $5 billion. Negative book equity. There are real reasons for that. REIT structure, aggressive buybacks, decades of depreciation on assets worth far more than they're carried at. It's not automatically alarming. But know it's there, because a leveraged annuity is a beautiful thing right up until the annuity part gets questioned. Let me tell you about Denise Ortega, because she's why I understand the last piece of this. Denise was a mentee of mine, sharp, miserable in corporate accounting, and about 6 years ago she quit and went into site acquisition for a tower developer. Find the parcel, court the landowner, get the thing through the local zoning board. I asked her once what the hardest part was. I assumed engineering, wind loading, soil, something technical. She said the hardest part is a room full of people at a Tuesday night township meeting who do not want to look at your tower. And then she said the thing that reframed the whole industry for me. She said, every single one of those angry meetings is why our existing towers are worth what they're worth. That's the moat, not the steel. Anybody can buy steel. The asset is the permit. The zoning variance, the setback approval, the environmental review, The FAA lighting clearance, 20 years of grandfathered rights on a hilltop where the county would never approve a new structure today. You are not buying a tower, you are buying permission, and they aren't making more permission. So, can a normal person own one of these? Yes, more often than you'd think. There's a whole ecosystem of independent tower owners, with anywhere from one site to a few hundred. My friend Priya Raghavan tried it in Texas. She had land, capital, and a spreadsheet that looked incredible. She learned 3 things fast. 1, you do not build a tower and then find a carrier. You find the carrier first, they tell you where they need coverage, and you build to suit. Speculative towers are how people lose $275,000. 2, you need power and fiber backhaul at the site, and if the nearest fiber is 4 miles away, your economics are dead before you start. 3, you're competing for that anchor tenant against companies with national master lease agreements and 100,000 sites of leverage. Priya did get one built, 22 months. She loves it, and she says she'll never do it again, which is the most honest review of an asset class I've ever heard. So where does this all go? The bear case is real. Carriers consolidated, there's no 4th tenant, satellite direct-to-cell is coming, and SpaceX paid $17 billion for spectrum to feed it. New lease rates for landowners are trending down, not up, because tower developers negotiate harder than the carriers ever did. The bull case is simpler. Every year, Americans use more data, and the laws of physics have not been repealed. Radio signal degrades over distance. Higher frequency 5G degrades faster. Satellites are wonderful for coverage and terrible for capacity. If you want 100,000 people in a dense city streaming video at once, you need equipment close to the ground, on structures, near people. That means towers. And every new generation of equipment is heavier, needs more space on the mast, and triggers a lease amendment, which triggers more rent. So, the full picture. $250,000 of steel that returns 3% with 1 tenant and 24% with 3. Rent that rises 3% a year forever, automatically. Land you rent cheap from a farmer and sublet expensive to 3 companies that hate each other. A moat made not of technology but of township meetings and permits nobody would approve today. 64% margins. 2/3 of revenue from 3 customers. And a 4th tenant everybody spent a decade waiting for that is never showing up. Ray Whitfield died a couple of years ago. His daughter runs the farm now. And that check still comes every month. And it's bigger than it was, because of a clause in a contract nobody in the family has ever read. That's the business. Not glamorous, not clever, and not going anywhere. Somebody, somewhere, is a landlord to a piece of the sky, and you drive past their tenants every single day without looking up. None of this is investment advice, obviously. It's just the math. If you want to go deeper on any of these numbers, the filings and the lease data I used are all linked down in the description. And if you own land with a tower on it, or you've got one of those letters sitting on your kitchen table right now, tell me about it in the comments, because I genuinely want to know what they offered you. Subscribe if you want more of these. Next one's already in the works.